One of my favorite parts of the research was, in his papers at the University of Miami, I had his side of conversations and letters. So I would go to the papers of the people he was writing to and from to find the other sides of it and the different pieces as they were connected to each other. And so I eventually put a notebook together that was the correspondence between what was called the Brethren. They had a funny little group called the War Correspondents and Camp Followers. So it was Ralph McGill, John Popham, Harry Golden from the Carolina Israelite. Popham was working for the New York Times and then ended up with the Chattanooga Times. Harry Ashmore, who was at the Arkansas Gazette during the Central High. So all of these letters that flew back and forth, they were very irreverent, but within them were some really deep conversation going on. And especially when it came around the Vietnam War, they split. Harry and Bill on one side, everybody else on the other side. Harry and Bill being vehemently against the war, and everybody else went in line with the Johnson administration. So it almost split them all up, but they maintained their friendships. But finding all of those letters back and forth to each other and the handwritten little notes that they would write to each other, they had great humor. They teased each other unmercifully. But you got a sense of the gallows humor that they had, understanding that they had to have each other's backs because they were the only ones who did for one another. So that was one piece that I loved. Of course, talking to Freck was another piece of it, but it also led me to their sons, Craig and Mahoney Baggs. And Mahoney had, one thing in a conversation with him, it was clear that the conversation was bringing up memories he hadn't had in a long time or hadn't accessed in a long time. And at one point he kind of stopped and he goes, my dad didn't die in Vietnam, but his name could be on that wall just the same, because of the relentless pursuit for peace that Bill had at the end of his life undid him. But that stayed with me, and that actually helped shape some of the way I looked at the story, because I started piecing together almost the psychology aspect of it. But another thing that was, there were so many serendipitous moments that happened during the research, and one of them occurred, I drove over to Colquitt, Georgia, where he'd grown up. After his parents had died, he was raised by some aunts in this tiny little town in southwestern Georgia, kind of in the same kind of area where President Jimmy Carter was raised in Plains. South of that is this tiny little town, Colquitt, peanut farmers, cotton farmers, very agricultural. So the first place I stop is at the newspaper, and I walk in. Miller County Liberal newspaper has been there for well over 100 years. And I say, where can I access your archives? I'd like to look at these years, the years that a gentleman named Bill Baggs lived here. And they're like, we lost all of our archives in a fire back in the 70s. And I was devastated. I was like, oh my God, where am I going to find the things? And this gentleman, who I eventually learned was a man named Terry Toole, whose family owned the paper, and his mother had been publisher of it, and he inherited it. He goes, there's a couple of bound books that were saved, and they are over in City Hall. I don't know what years they are. Nobody's looked at them in years. They may be helpful, they may not. So a friend and I go over to City Hall. They're like, oh, you want those? Oh my God, those are at the top of it. If you're willing to climb a ladder, you can get them. So we were like, we'll climb a ladder. So we climb a ladder, we get up there, dusty as all get out. And we pull these big, those big tabloid bound things of newspapers down. And there's 3 books. And they're wrapped in this crumbling brown paper. But we're like being very ginger, trying not to mess anything up. And it's all the years we need. It's the years from 36 to 41 when he lived there. So we found so many good pieces that help set context for the time he was growing up. And we also found a couple of pieces he wrote about sports. We found the article when he was nominated and selected as valedictorian of his class, when he lettered in sports. His sister's bridal announcement, which also gave the family history. So then we were able to start piecing together. I could start researching people in the family and find out what they had done and do genealogy research. And just little things just started falling into place. And so then I could start constructing what his childhood was like and understand what things he saw to sort of shape who he became. And then when I met Craig Baggs, his oldest son, I mean, I'm sure it was weird for them to hear from somebody and say, "Hey, I want to write a book about your dad. Will you talk to me?" But what was interesting, then all of a sudden I had access to letters that were written and hand notes that were written between between Bill and Freck. And there were things that they were like, "We're not sure what this is." And I was like, "Oh, that's John F. Kennedy's button from his jacket that Jackie gave as a memento after the president's assassination." Because here's the letter where he asks for a pen. He basically says, "I want something to hold on to that reminds me of him." And this is what she sent him. And then Craig tells this great story. He goes, "Yeah, the letter that came with that button, my mom was so mad that Kennedy had been in Miami the week before the assassination, and she wanted to meet him, but Bill did not introduce her. They were at a dinner, but he did not introduce her." And Craig said, he goes, "I'm pretty sure my dad knew that the president was a bit of a player." So he was like, keep his wife away from that. And Craig goes, "Yeah, Mom was so incensed that when the letter came that Jackie Kennedy had written that accompanied this, she tore it up." And I'm like, "Oh, that letter is gone." And I always wondered, what did Jackie Kennedy say in this card that was a response to Bill's letter? But at least the button remains and a block of lucite.